Hello, I'm David Hughes. Welcome to Your Perfect Body, the podcast of the esoteric teaching community. Today's selection is an essay entitled Seduced by Untruth. In the beginning was the void. Nihilism. Isn't it ironic how so many theologies try to convince us that you can create something out of nothing? Of course, they hide the stark illogic of this impossible proposition with fine words, calling it oneness, unity, or even brahman. At least the Theravada Buddhists are openly voidist. But voidism lurks covertly behind many respectable religious and spiritual fronts. Judaism, Kabbalah, most schools of yoga and Vedanta, even most Christian sects declare that God is ultimately impersonal and formless if you read the fine print. And let's not forget reductionistic materialistic science, that supposed bastion of empiricism. It tries to tell us that before the Big Bang was, well, nothing. What is emptiness, the void, or nothingness anyway? It is simply anything that is imperceptible to our dull, limited senses. Anything too small, too big, or too subtle for us to perceive seems like nothing. But that doesn't mean there really is nothing there. The night is dark only because we cannot see into the infrared or radio spectrum. The vast ocean seems formless until we measure and map its complex currents and thermal structure from space. Even intergalactic space itself is not empty, but filled with vast clouds of highly charged plasma and huge electrical currents. There is no such thing as nothing, and no such place as nowhere. Even the unmanifest spiritual realm exists, but its subtle energies of immanent transcendence are simply beyond the perception of our gross, contaminated material senses. In reality, the spiritual realm is filled with a staggering variety of eternal spiritual forms. No one can demonstrate formlessness, voidness, or emptiness experimentally. Everywhere we look, something exists. Form is fundamental. Duality and ever-increasing complexity are the universal laws. The same goes for oneness. Especially, oneness of consciousness is as much of an ontological impossibility as something from nothing. Consciousness and beingness are intrinsically individual, personal, subjective, and self-referential. But because we do not understand the ontology of consciousness, we can be deceived with high-sounding words into accepting the impossible theory of an impersonal God. This suits those who manipulate religion to political ends, because it magically appears to dissolve the fundamental differences between right and wrong, good and evil. With no personal God in control of creation, there is no longer any absolute standard of truth. Thus, the false religion of voidness and impersonalism allows the state to dictate morality through force, policy, and the courts as it suits the purposes of power. How convenient that no one can offer any argument, since all have been seduced by the untruth that economic greed in the service of unlimited sense gratification is the end goal of human life. The false philosophy of voidness and impersonalism is the greatest source of evil, because it denies the transcendental personality and sovereignty of Godhead, who is all good. This malevolent doctrine was relegated to the shadows of human depravity until the present historical age of Kali, when, through the ignorance and weakness of people in general and religious leaders in particular, it has practically become universal. Do not think that a mere philosophy is without consequence. For the esoteric teaching holds that our ontology, or the stories we tell ourselves about the way the world is and came to be, creates our destiny. The esoteric teaching offers the suffering victims of the age of Kali cooling relief from the burning fire of impersonal doctrine, which is hidden everywhere, like the harmful excesses of salt and sugar in the processed food products ubiquitous in our mechanized consumer society. The deep truth of the esoteric teaching is very difficult to realize for people whose intelligence is covered by the pernicious, subversive influence of impersonalism and voidism. Nevertheless, those who sacrifice everything to bring this important spiritual path to the world do so because they see the truth and realize the tremendous importance of this teaching to the well-being and spiritual progress of the entire world. So many people find fault with our presentation of the esoteric teaching because we so strongly preach against the influence of this impossible philosophy of impersonalism. And actually, impersonalism is a new thing. The principal impersonalist philosopher, Shankaracharya, appeared in India only 1600 years ago, which makes him much newer than the Vedic sources upon which the esoteric teaching is based. As it turns out, we also accept the doctrine of devolution, that humans in the past were much more intelligent, stronger, and more spiritually aware than humans in the present. And impersonalism is one of the signposts of the devolution of the human consciousness. The fact that this relatively new philosophy, newer than Christianity, newer than Buddhism, and much newer than the Vedas, can take over so much of human thought and become embedded in so much of human philosophy and endeavor, shows that we have lost a great deal of intelligence. Because, as we pointed out in the scripted part of this talk, it is impossible to produce something from nothing, even for God. God is definitely something. He's not a nothing. And oneness with God, which is the supposed goal of the impersonalist philosophers, is impossible to prove, impossible to demonstrate, and actually impossible to achieve. It's simply an excuse for negating the customary dualities of right and wrong, good and evil, and the rules of morality that follow from them. People want to have a free hand in their life. They want to be unrestricted in their activities and thoughts. And the influence of religion and morality has always been to check them and to make them think twice before acting. And this is good for them because the consequences of many acts, as we have pointed out in our presentation so far, are that one creates unwanted reactions through the action of the law of karma. Now, it's a benefit if we are inhibited in the pursuit of sense gratification, because that saves us from performing so many things that will come back to haunt us later. Therefore, religious morality and the rules and regulations of spiritual life are there to save us, not to exert power over us or dominate us, although I'm sure there are unscrupulous religionists who have used it in that way in the past. That is not the orientation of the esoteric teaching. The esoteric teaching gives you a system of ontology and says, if you apply this ontology in your life, you will benefit. And then it's up to you. And we do not use any force or power to compel, but we use the truth to impel. So those who take up this esoteric teaching, they find that in the long run especially, their lives are greatly improved and their consciousness is clear and their senses are pure and they can perceive the transcendental reality. And that is really the goal of all religious and spiritual teachings. In addition to that, the esoteric teaching helps you find your real, eternal, perfect body. And that is something that no other path can actually offer, although they may pretend to offer it. They don't really provide the means or the ontological basis. Now, one more thing before we close. We use